the lesson that we had last week, we're talking about, we took a break from Gospel of John, and we were going through the one of the most disturbing stories in the Bible, and that was a some people found that a difficult and complex lesson. This is going to be very different. This will be maybe the easiest lesson I've ever taught. Okay, this lesson will be so simple. The main point of the lesson, I will predict, you will never forget, and you'll be able to teach this lesson to anybody you want to because it's so simple. And you can tell me at the end if I'm delusional or if I hit the nail on the head. But I think this is a really simple lesson. So this, where we've been in the Gospel of John, we're John chapter 14 now, starting John chapter 14. And it's Thursday night, the night before Jesus is crucified. He's just had the Last Supper with his disciples. And the dinner has ended. And Judas has departed. And then Jesus crosses over to Gethsemane, and he gives, and that night he gives a lengthy and significant talk to the apostles. This is kind of his farewell discourse, and it's John 14, 15, 16, 17. So it's about 4 chapters long here, and the backdrop, Jesus had just said in John chapter 13, verse 33, he had said, I'm going somewhere, and where I'm going, you can't come. Of course, Peter says, well, why not? Where are you going? Why can't I go with you? He says, I'm only willing to lay down my life to go with you. And of course, he would end up eating those words. Jesus corrects him. He says, you're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows, before the next morning. This is night. You're going to deny me 3 times, which of course was fulfilled. So let's pick it up. So this is the backdrop of the story. John chapter 14. Let's read the first 6 verses here. Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And where I go, you know, and the way you know. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So this is a very, very famous saying of Jesus. And my good friend Chris Reardon focuses on this part of the Bible an enormous amount when I'm talking to him. So I was talking to him about this yesterday because he's always talking about this little passage of the Bible right here and the significance of it. So storyline here, basically, he's going somewhere they can't go, and he tries to encourage them. He says, I'm going to go prepare a place for you. I'll come back to get you and bring you where I'm going. And then Thomas says, oh, and by the way, you know where I'm going and you also know the way. And Thomas says, what are you talking about? We don't know where you're going. How can we possibly know the way there? And then Jesus answers the famous statement, one of the most famous statements of Jesus of all. He says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And so Jesus' backdrop is that's answering the question from Thomas saying, we don't know where you're going. How can we possibly know the way? So that's Jesus' response to that. So first question that I want to ask, there's one word in this story here that struck me as a little strange. And in John chapter 14, verse 2, Jesus says, in my Father's house are many mansions. Now, when I think of when you think of a mansion, what do you think of? I think of a house that's too big for the people who live inside of it. That's what I think of. Okay. That's what I think of. I think of a mansion. I think of a big house, and back in the old days, a lord or a baron would live in a mansion, a big mansion, and then people of the upper middle class, now here in New England, if they want to show the world that they have made it, what do? You get a Mercedes-Benz and you buy a McMansion. McMansion is the Mc is think like McDonald's. Like they're all over the place, the same thing. So there's these little cookie cutter mini mansions that dot the landscape of upper middle class neighborhoods. So mansion has a kind of a negative connotation in my mind. Also, when I think of the word mansion, I think of a certain song. And I think most of us in the room have sung that song many times or heard that song. And I will not sing it for you, but I will recite the words of the song. This is, I've got a mansion just over the hilltop is the song. So I see some smiles. You remember that song. I'm singing it before. And here's the lyrics to the song. I'm satisfied with just a cottage below, a little silver and a little gold. But in that city where the ransom will shine, I want a gold one that's silver lined. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where we'll never grow old. Someday yonder we'll never more wander, but walk on streets that are purest gold. So, and then the next verse is, don't think me poor, deserted, or lonely. I'm not discouraged. I'm heaven bound. But I'm just a pilgrim in search of a city. I want a mansion, a robe and a crown, or some version will say I want a mansion, a harp and a crown. So, and then once again, there's the chorus, I've got a mansion just over the hilltop. So anyway, I think of that song. That's drummed into my head from singing it. And I remember singing it wondering, this song sounds kind of materialistic to me. I've got a little house here, but I'm looking forward to the big man. I've got a little silver and gold, but I'm going to hit it big. I'm going to hit the jackpot, the mega bucks after I die, and I'm going to get the big house. Forget this little house I've got to deal with right here now. So I'm thinking that doesn't sound very spiritual to me, but obviously it's based on this passage from John 14 where Jesus says, "I go and there are many mansions there." So. And I wonder, when was this song written, and what does the word mansion mean, and what did it mean in the old translation? So I think the word mansion in the past in English meant simply a dwelling or a residence. It wasn't necessarily a big one. It was just so, in older translations, this isn't mistaken. And actually, the same word is used in John 14:23. We can turn there, and I'll read it to you. In the same passage, the same exact word is used. Jesus answered and said to him, "If anyone loves me, he will keep my word. My Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him." So, and it says our home in the New King James. In the King James, American Standard, New American Standard, and some other translations, it says abode with him. It's abode or residence. So that's how it's translated in the same chapter in another place. We'll make our home or our abode with him. So, clearly from context, that's what the word means. It means home or abode. The word mansion a few hundred years ago just meant a home or abode, and it's taken on another meaning today. Now, unfortunately, the song, I've got a mansion just over the hilltop, was written fairly recently. It's 1949, just a few years before I was born. So that explains he's got the modern concept of mansion, not the classic version. So Jesus isn't saying, I've got this gigantic house for you. He's saying, I've got a place for you. I have an abode for you. So that's the idea. So the word mansion may throw you a little bit there, but just a little background for that. So what he's saying, I think, is that there are many dwelling places. There's room for each of you there, and I'm going to prepare a place for you where my Father is. So the picture is that in my Father's house, in my Father's place, there are many rooms, there are many abodes. There's room for all of you there. So He's saying this to comfort his followers. And but even then, even if you get the materialistic mansion view out of your head, I think people still take this statement of Jesus off into some strange places. And some will take the idea, in my Father's house are many rooms or much space, and they'll say, see, it's a big tent. All kinds of people are going to be there. That the Buddhists will have some space there, and the Muslims will have some space there, and all these different people, because there's lots of room. There's many rooms in my Father's house. But that doesn't make any sense, because Jesus says right after this, in the passage we read, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. He says, no one comes to the Father except through me. Now, that's a pretty disturbing statement. Most people, if they looked at it and thought about it, would say, that's pretty arrogant of Jesus, that there's no way to the Father except through him. Either it's true or it's not. But that's what Jesus said. There's no other way to the Father. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That is what Jesus said. He said, go, at the ending of the Gospel of Mark, he said, go into all the world and preach the gospel, preach the good news. He who believes and is baptized will be saved, and he who doesn't believe will be condemned. You have to believe in Jesus. You have to have faith in Jesus in order to be saved. That's the only way. So Jesus is saying, there are many rooms in my Father's house. The rooms are reserved only for those who are following Jesus and believe in Jesus. And Peter said the same thing. He's speaking to the Jews who believe in God and believe in the prophets. And he says there's no other name under heaven given to men by which we must be saved in Acts 4:12. Now I've heard other people take this idea of there are many rooms in my Father's house to say, well, it's just like a hotel where all these different wings in there. And there's the Catholic wing, there's the Orthodox wing, there's the Protestant wing, and then there's the Anabaptist wing. There are all these rooms and areas. This is a big complex hotel. And Jesus, that's not Jesus' intention either. Jesus says that he's praying for the unity of all believers, that we may be one as he and the Father are one. So that's not his intention either. This isn't talking about diversity. It's talking about that there's room for us, there's place for us, but the way is definitely narrow. So Jesus says he's about to go somewhere, and he even tells the apostles, you know where I'm going. Where is he going? In John 14, verse 2 and 3, he says, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And in John chapter 14, verses 12 and 28, he says, I am going to my Father. And then let's read, it's part of the same address, but he spells it out plainly in John chapter 16. Let's jump ahead to verses 28 and 29, where he answers this question finally, plainly. John chapter 16, verse 20. I came forth from the Father and have come into the world. Again, I leave the world and go to the Father. So he came from the Father and he's returning to the Father. That's where he's going. And where is the Father? Jesus, when he taught us to pray in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 9, he says, pray, our Father who art in heaven, or who is in heaven. God is in heaven. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 34, he says, whoever confesses me before men, him I will confess before my Father who is in heaven. So, where is Jesus going? He's going to be with the Father. He will be in heaven. That's what he's saying. So that's where he's going. He says, I'm going to heaven. There's room for you, and I'm coming back to get you too. Now, it talks about Jesus being in heaven many places in Scriptures. It says that he is now seated at the right hand of God in heaven. Jesus spoke about that in Luke chapter 22, verse 69. Peter talks about that in Stephen talks about that in Acts chapter 7. I see heaven open and the Son of Man before at the right hand of God. And Colossians and 3:1, Hebrews 12:2, it talks about that as well. I think this is a fulfillment of the prophecy in Psalm 110, verse 1, which is Psalm 109 in the Septuagint. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. So the idea is that Jesus is now seated at the right hand of God. He is in heaven now, and that's where he said he was going. Now, just to eliminate any confusion here, hopefully, when Jesus died, the Bible says that he descended into Hades. Acts chapter 2, Peter talks about that. He quotes from Psalm 16. You will not leave my soul in Hades, nor will you let your Holy One see decay. He says that applied to Jesus. He was in Hades. He descended into Hades while he was while he was in the tomb. His spirit went to Hades. But Peter also says, he explains the whole thing. He says that in Acts chapter 2, he says that he was in Hades, but now he is ascended to the right hand of God, seated at the right hand of God in the heavens. And he quotes there in Psalm 110. So that's Jesus descended into Hades, and he ascended to heaven and is seated at the right hand of God. So that's what he said he'd be with the Father, and he's coming to take us there as well. So we figured out part of this is where is he going? He's going to be with the Father. He's going to heaven. That's where he's going. He's going to Hades first, but he's going to heaven as his destination. Now the other question, Thomas says, we don't know where you're going. We know the answer to that. He says, and we don't know how to get there. So we don't know where you're going. So how can we know how to get there? So the question is, now that we know where he's going to heaven, how do you get there? Now, is there any question that you can think of that's more important than that? How do you get to heaven? I can't think of any. Really. I can't think of any. Jesus implies as much when he asks the rhetorical question in Mark chapter 8, what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? And you think about it. If you got everything right and perfect in this world, fame, fortune, pleasure, wealth, whatever it is you can think of, just fill in the blanks. The perfect life, and you die and you lose your salvation. What have you gained? If you gain the whole world and lose your soul, you've gained nothing. So the most important question anyone could possibly ask was the question Thomas asked without even realizing. How do we get there? Okay, how do you get to heaven? And the question can be answered if somebody asks me, well, Chuck, you've invited me over for dinner, but how do I get to your house? Okay? Now, there's two ways I could answer the question. One is I could give you a map. I'm an engineer, a civil engineer, so I think about maps. That's why I'm kind of geared that way. So I'd give you a map and say, well, here's where we are. You follow this road, turn left, turn right, and give you a map so you can see exactly how to get there. Or I could give you detailed directions. Go down the hill, make your first left, take your second right, go to the end, go through the traffic light, first left, and so forth. So I could give you specific directions to get there. So Jesus gives specific directions, but they're a little puzzling. He says, how do we get there? Well, he says, I am the way. What does that mean? You're the direction? That doesn't sound like detailed directions. How do we get to this place where you're going? He says, I am the way. What does that mean? And I think Jesus explains that. He reveals that later on in this discourse. So rather than wait until the next couple of lessons, let's just look at the answer. Let's jump right to the answer. John chapter 14, let's read a little further in the chapter. I'm going to read verses 18 to 24. to think about this is when Jesus says, I am the way, he's giving instructions, but we have to understand what that means. Verse 18, I will not leave you as orphans, I will come to you. A little while longer, and the world will see me no more. But you will see me, because I live, you will live also. At that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. He who has my commands and keeps them, it is he who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and manifest myself to him. Judas, not Iscariot, said to him, Lord, how is it you will manifest yourself to us and not to the world? Verse 23, Jesus answered and said to them, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. He who does not love me does not keep my words. The word which you hear is not mine, but the Father's who sent me. So in verse 23, he says, if anyone loves me, he'll keep my word, and my Father will love him. We'll come and make our home with him. If we want to be dwelling with Jesus and the Father forever, if we want to get to heaven, what does Jesus say we need to do? Very simple. Do what I told you. Follow my commands. Keep my word. That's it. We obey his teachings. We keep his word. And he repeated this message again in the form of a parable in the story of the vine and the branches. How do you get there? What's the way? And we're going to read that at John chapter 15, verses 1 to 10. Jesus said, I'm the true vine, my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. You're already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I'm the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit. Without me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he's cast out as a branch and withered, and they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire, and it shall be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, so you will be my disciples. As the Father loved me, I also have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I've kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. So, what's Jesus saying here? I'm the vine, you're the branches. You have to abide in me. What does it mean to abide in me? It means keeping his commands, doing what he says, following his teachings. So it's really pretty simple. Jesus says he is the vine, he is the way. He is the way to heaven. How do you get to heaven? Follow his teachings. Very simple. So let's process the implications of that. The goal, we're on a journey here in life. We're on a journey. The goal is to make it to heaven, to dwell with Jesus and his Father forever. And there's a place for us there. We just have to show up. The goal is heaven. It's not anything on this earth. Sometimes preachers who are trying to spread the gospel will present it in a way to lure people into becoming Christians. They say, if you become a Christian, you can have a great life here on the earth. The Christians have the best life on earth. Okay, they'll say, if you do this, you're going to have a great marriage, a happy family, good friends who love you and will back you up. You can go on nice vacations. You can have a great retirement. You become a Christian, you're going to get a great life on the earth. And this is basically like a used car salesman. They're telling you what you want to hear to entice you to buy what they're selling. That's not what Jesus said at all. And that's not what the New Testament says. In fact, Jesus warned us in the parable of the sower about the dangers of the third soil. The dangers of the third soil are people who are living for the pleasures of this world. He says, stay away from that stuff. That's poison. That's going to choke you and strangle you. You don't use that to encourage people to become Christians. The third soil that the people are choked out by life's worries, riches, and pleasures. It's not about this life. The heroes of faith that are held up in Hebrews chapter 11 what kind of lives did they lead? Generally, they're hated and persecuted. They were chased around. They were killed. They were stoned. They were sawed into. They were persecuted. They were treated badly. And these are the heroes that we're supposed to follow. Jesus, the apostles, the great heroes of faith in the church generally are persecuted and have a rough life. Jesus said, don't fear those who kill the body but can't kill the soul. Rather, fear him who's able to destroy both soul and body in hell in Matthew 10:28. So that's the message of Jesus is, you're not in it for pleasure in this life. That's not, you don't need to worry about that, and that's not what you're here for. That's not what this is all about. So the goal is heaven. It's not anything on this earth. The second point related to that is our hope. The thing we are hoping and looking forward to is the resurrection and is heaven. So I want to ask you, honestly, what are the things you're most hoping for and looking forward to in life? Where's your heart? Where's your heart? What are you hoping for? That tells you a lot about anybody. You know, a lot of people are hoping for marriage, children, retirement, vacations. Really? Is that what your hope is? Wow, just won't be great. I only got another year, and then I don't have to be working anymore. I can relax. Okay? What are you hoping for? What are you looking forward to? Let's read Romans chapter 8. What we should be hoping for. I think one of the most important things we can do is set our hopes on the right place. This is a real simple lesson. Romans chapter 8, let's start reading in verse 18. Read verses 18 to 25. Paul's writing, of course, he says, I consider the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly awaits for the revealing of the sons of God. The creation was subject to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. Because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. Not only that, but we also, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, eagerly awaiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body. For we were saved in this hope. But the hope that is seen is not hope, for why does one still hope for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do see, but if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance. So we're looking forward to something we can't see right now, which is our redemption. It's the resurrection of the dead and its eternal life. He said this is what all creation is looking forward to, and it's going to take perseverance to get there. You don't hope for what you can see. You're only hoping for things you can't see. And that's where hoping for eternal hope is for eternal life. Colossians 1, Paul speaks of the hope that we have. He said, the hope which is laid up for you in heaven, which you heard before in the word of the truth of the gospel. That's our hope. That was Paul's hope. His hope was in heaven. It wasn't in this life. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 19, it's a passage I think about all the time. Paul says, if in this life only we have hope in Christ, we are of all men the most pitiable. Paul wasn't living for the blessings of this life. He understood that. 1 Thessalonians 5:8. Paul says, let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet, the hope of salvation. Now, I thought about that. It says, the helmet is the hope of salvation. That's what protects us. Looking forward to. If that's where our hope is, that'll protect us. I get a totally different sense. I was thinking about, well, wait a minute. In Ephesians 6, a much more well-known passage, it talks about the helmet of salvation. Here he says the helmet of the hope of salvation. And the picture in Ephesians is that if we are fully equipped for battle, then we will be able to stand in the end and inherit eternal life. So the helmet is not salvation that's a done deal. The helmet is, I think, is the hope of salvation. And that's what protected Paul's head, was his hope in salvation, not in the things of this life. To me, it makes perfect sense. And I see Ephesians 6:17 in a new light with that in mind. I think it's a fuller explanation. So we see what the goal is. We see what the hope is that we should have to drive us there. And now the other thing is, what's the way to get there? What's the route? What are the directions? And the good news is it's very simple. The way to our hope and our goal of heaven is to follow the commands of Jesus. All of them. That's the way. Jesus says, I am the way, you know the way. And then he says, this is the way. I'm the vine, you're the branches. You have to abide in me. And it means obeying my teachings. This is bad news. This is horribly bad news to most of the Christians in this country who don't want to believe this. This is tremendously unpopular, but it's the plainest, clearest thing. It's all over the Gospels. The way to heaven is to obey all the commands of Jesus. Very simple. That's the way. I want you to imagine that you want to go to visit, well, here we are in Boston, you want to go to visit the Empire State Building in New York City. Okay, and I write out detailed directions of how to get to the Empire State Building. So you go down this road, then you take 128, you get on the Mass Pike, Route 90, you go west, and then I say you get off at Sturbridge, you head south. So I give you all these directions right onto the island of Manhattan, right to the foot of the Empire State Building, because that's where you want to go. Okay? So I write out all the directions. I give you the directions. What would happen if you looked at these directions and say, you know, these directions are a burden. These directions are just too much. I'm just going to take the first 4 things on here, rip the rest of the page off, throw it in the trash can. Once I get to the part that says take Route 90 west, that's good enough. If that's as far as you go with the directions, are you going to end up at the Empire State Building? I'll tell you where you're going to end up. You're going to end up in Seattle, Washington, in the Pacific Ocean. 3,000 miles away from, you're going to end up further away than where you are right now if you just follow part of the directions. You follow what I'm saying there. Does that make sense to you? You follow that? And this is exactly what most Christians are doing. They're saying, wait a minute, these are the directions? This is too much. This is a burden. I'll just pick part of the directions. I'm going to take the first 2 or 3 lines. I'll just take one of the lines in the middle that I like. And I'm just going to follow that one. And that's probably good enough. This is too hard. And I'm sure I'll end up there. Anyway, this is probably good enough. You know, some Christians, what they do is they say, they look at all the directions and they say, you know, this John 3:16, I like that part. Let's throw everything else out. All I have to do, it says, just believe. Or Romans 10:9. Let me just use that. That's all I need to do. So you got one group of people, one massive group of people that's what they do. Let's take this part of the direction. We'll take Ephesians 2:8 and 9, Romans 10:9, John 3:16. That's all we need to do. Forget the rest of the directions that Jesus gave us. That's the first group of people. Second group of people. Let's take Acts 2:38. Matthew 28:18-20. And the teachings of Jesus about gross sexual immorality. Certainly that's enough to get us there. We don't have to follow all these other teachings, do we? Certainly we don't have to follow the teachings about materialism, divorce and remarriage, non-resistance, role of women, no lawsuits among Christians, and separation from the world. That's a burden. That's too hard. I don't want to do that. I want to get to my destination, but I don't want to follow the directions to get there. That's not going to cut it. Or imagine a third group that says, I really like the teachings of Jesus on holiness and separation from the world and the role of men and women. I like that part of the directions. Down the last half of the directions, I like that. But this part about evangelism, seeking and saving the lost, making disciples, the part that talks about how you're actually converted, discipleship, gossip, materialism, confessing sins, those things are a burden. That's really going to mess my life up if I try to do those things. I'm not going to do that. And they take those parts of the directions and throw them in the trash can. Is that going to cut it? I don't think so. That's not what Jesus is looking for. And there's all kinds of groups that are out there that want to ignore the teachings of Jesus about unity, which we're going to hit that later on in this discourse. Jesus says he wants all of his followers to be one as he and the Father are one. There's no room for this sectarian spirit of me and my little group. We can't do that. And we can't do that in this room. Nobody can do that. This is a teaching of Jesus. We have to follow all his teachings. The other thing is you can't start making two lists. Well, these directions are important and these directions are unimportant. These directions are these are salvation issues, but these other issues, these other commands of Jesus, we can violate with absolute impunity because our leaders said they weren't important. Well, I'm sorry, no leader. We have one teacher, the Christ. He's it. And he says he is the way. We have to follow his teachings. All of them. We have no business picking and choosing. So, very simple. You want to get to heaven, follow the teachings of Jesus. All of them. The popular ones, the unpopular ones. And everybody's got their blind spots. I think it's good for us to be around people that are challenging us and helping us to see things that we're not naturally strong in. Because we're all missing things. But the goal is we want to have a heart that we obey everything. And if somebody shows us something we're not following, we'll study it out. And if that's what Jesus says, we want to do it. So, the implications of this teaching. We have to follow the teachings of Jesus if we want to make it to heaven. So simple. See the Christian life as a journey. Okay, this isn't you've made it home when you become a Christian. You're just starting on the journey. You have to abide in him. You have to remain in him. You have to follow all of his teachings. We have a goal that's not in this life, and we have to follow his directions. He's the way. We can't pick and choose among the teachings of Jesus. And no matter what any religious leaders tell us, we just can't do that. And this is how we demonstrate our love for Jesus and for the Father. This is how he knows who really loves him. Lots of people have these warm, gushy feelings towards Jesus, but Jesus lays it right out here. This is what it means to love me. You follow my commands. And the commands include loving God with our whole heart, soul, mind, and strength. It includes loving our neighbors as ourselves. It includes taking care of the poor. And it includes all of these things. We can't just specialize and pick the ones that we like. And we have to, for those who are preaching and teaching the Bible, they have a special responsibility, just like Paul told Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2, that he has to be prepared to teach the commands of Jesus in season and out of season. That means when it's popular and when it's not popular. It doesn't make any difference. It's just all the time. This is it. Paul explained this idea of the map of how to get to heaven. Basically, Paul says that we have a map contained in the Scriptures in the Old Testament story of the Exodus. After the Passover lamb is sacrificed, the people have to clear out all the yeast in their house. And Paul talks about that in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 about Christ as the Passover lamb that was sacrificed. Now we clear all the yeast out. And what do they do after that? They had to pass through the water. They're born again of the water and the Spirit. They're baptized in the cloud and the sea when they pass through the Red Sea with a wall of water on each side. Paul in 1 Corinthians 10 verses 1 to 13, he explains all this. He says that water represented baptism. That's the beginning of the journey. You get through the water, you're not in the promised land. You don't just stay there and wait for the promised land to be dropped on your head. You're on a journey, and you got to keep going where the Spirit tells you to go. And it's a time of testing. We're strengthened. We've all been baptized. We eat the spiritual food. We drink the spiritual drink. We know what that's referring to. And then he talks about it's a time of testing. Unfortunately, most of the people didn't make it in the time of testing. They fell to one of four sins that are mentioned there. He mentions they fell to idolatry, they fell to sexual immorality, they fell to testing the Lord, putting the Lord to the test, and then they fell to complaining. They were complaining about all kinds of things. They were complaining about the things that they didn't like the food. They didn't like the leaders that they had. They started complaining about the leaders. I'm not saying this, but it's saying don't complain about me. That's not what I'm talking about here. Okay, I'm not saying it for that reason. But even if you're in a situation, whoever hears this, we're in a situation where you have imperfect leaders. Well, don't be a complainer. There's no room for that. They get washed. They didn't make it. People didn't make it because of their complaining. Okay, we can't do that. So they went through a time of testing, and most of them who were baptized and ate the spiritual food and drank the spiritual drink, most of them didn't make it to the promised land. Paul says this is a warning for us. This is a map of the Christian life. You get out of you put the sin away, you get baptized, and then you're in the wilderness. This is not the promised land. This is a desert infested with snakes and scorpions. We want to get out of here. We don't hope to make a nice place for ourselves in the desert. We want to get out of the desert and go to the promised land. That's our goal. So let's keep our eyes on the prize here. And what it's going to take a heart to obey all the commands of Jesus. The other thing it's going to take is perseverance. Jesus said that we have to abide in Him. We must remain in Him. We've got to make it all the way to the end. We've got to persevere even when we see many around us who are faltering and stumbling, like Joshua and Caleb. They saw a lot of dead bodies in the desert, but they kept on going. In Matthew 24, verses 12 and 13, we'll close with this verse. Jesus said what they should expect in the future. He said, because lawlessness will abound. What's lawlessness? Lawlessness is people who don't want to obey the commands of God. Because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. So, this is the world's simplest lesson. The goal is heaven. The way to get to heaven, and when you want people like one verse salvation, Acts 2:38 or John 3:16, I'll give you one verse salvation. One verse salvation is Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That tells you all you need to know. Just follow all of His commands, and you'll make it to heaven. That's what it's going to take. Amen.